Right, back here with Frankie Boyle, part 2. I don't know why I'm shouting. All right, this government, we're talking about this government under the cloak, this is my whole premise, this government under the cloak of austerity, austerity for certain sections of society, under the cloak of austerity is moving the public into the private, creating like a Blade Runner Tyrell corporation.
Well, I agree with you to an extent, but I think you've got to be careful of that whole, you've got to look at what you're allowed to say in a propaganda model. Why is it we're allowed to bang on about austerity and bang on about this government? Labour started PFI, and Labour basically made it the case that you couldn't build any fucking public projects with public money, that you had to borrow. And one of the most fucking disgraceful things was the M25 when it was widened pre the Olympics. That deal, which apparently should have cost about 500 million, ended up costing 5 billion, and the people involved in supposedly putting up the money for it actually borrowed the money from the government. We lent them the money to put us in debt to them, and they borrowed it through Royal Bank of Scotland, which at the time was owned like 70% by the public anyway. So they borrowed it from us twice, and now they're lending it back to us at an extortionate rate of interest. So there's no pretense, and there hasn't been for 15 years or so, that they're not engaged in large-scale attempts to transfer public money into private hands. That's what it's all about.
But a lot of like the money that when I saw the last budget thing, £45 billion was servicing our debt, and the 45 billion, which is for nothing, we're giving to banks, but they are the same banks that are building our hospitals, that are charging us big PFI things. It doesn't make sense. You just write that off. Say, what the fuck? What are you talking about?
Oh, well, PFI debt is much, much bigger than that. Are you talking about the debt in terms of bond debt?
Bond debt.
Yeah, well, bond debt, I mean, every country has that. I mean, we had that,
But 45 billion, that's more than our military.
Well, get our military to fucking pay it off then, But, there's nothing wrong with having a fucking operating debt in your country. That whole idea of, we need to get this deficit down and stuff. We've always had that. I mean, the real problem is that they've promised contracts over PFI that amount to just a fucking essentially an egregious debt, the sort of debt that you would have associated 30 years ago with countries in the third world being forced to sign contracts that they weren't really able to agree to.
It's just masses of money, because they see that it's a lot of money collected every year. We said it's trillions of pounds, and they want that money. That's their gold mine. Do David Cameron in 30 seconds.
David Cameron is a drop of pretense. You know what I mean? So there was the old pretense of, the great quote from Cameron: "I'm not concerned if I become unpopular." You're like, wait a minute, mate, you're the fucking Prime Minister. You're supposed to be standing for re-election. But, his interests, that's interesting. He's told you his interests aren't in getting votes and getting re-elected. His interests are in pushing through business interests. His interests are making sure as much public money goes into private hands as possible, right? And he said that explicitly. Why is he not concerned about getting votes? Because Tony Blair was concerned about getting votes. Margaret Thatcher was concerned about getting votes to push forward their agenda. Why is David Cameron not concerned about getting votes? David Cameron's not concerned about getting votes because he knows the other party are now no different from him. For the first time, they have completely the same agenda, to the point where George Osborne can come out and announce things just out of the fucking blue, like people are going to have to wait a week before they get any benefit payments, and Ed Balls within minutes will be on television going, "Yeah, sounds fair enough." There's absolutely nothing between them, so they don't need to give a fuck who gets elected anymore.
What about this racist van?
Yeah, it's just fucking... It's that thing, isn't it? It started, and this is interesting, people thought, oh, that's some rogue operators. That's fucking some mad racist. That's maybe EDL or something. It's not. It's the fucking government. That whole idea that racism kind of seeps up from the ground and that the government respond to racist forces in society is bullshit. It trickles down from the top. It's instituted by policy, and then it trickles down to fucking people driving about in their fucking racist vans.
We've also got the border control at tube stations, Walthamstow, Kensal Green, Cricklewood, racially profiling people, and one MP has said that she's found out that it's they're stopping just black people.
Sure. I mean, that doesn't surprise me, but I
mean, that's incredible for us to be living in this moment in history.
And 5 years ago that would have seemed impossible. I mean, utterly impossible. That seemed utterly impossible after the 7/7 tube bombings, that you could do that to any extent.
Yeah. And also, it's a Tory agenda, isn't it? It's about scapegoating. So what the next election on immigration, nationalism, social security, and prejudice is about prejudice, and they're trying to get to win some kind of like populist vote on difference.
Well, I think they've got to kind of explain people's unhappiness. They've got to explain to people why they're so marginalised. Do you know what I mean? So them saying to people, well, why don't you have control in your life? Why are you so fucking unhappy? And they can't say, well, it's because of us. We've come in and fucking like closed down your library and your swimming pool and fucked you over in 10 different ways.
It's their fault.
It's these guys over here. So there's got to be an outlet, I
mean, there's been some another sort of like a community group, the disabled, appalling attacks on the disabled through things like bedroom tax, where completely discriminated against.
I think they're going to kill a lot of disabled people. I mean, they already are killing a lot of disabled people, and I think it's linked into this idea of, if you're not productive in our terms in society, then fuck you. So
Ian Duncan Smith.
They hate able-bodied people who they don't see as productive, right? What the fuck do you think they think of disabled people who in their fucked up reality?
And the workfare program where Grant Shapps came out and he said that he was proud of the fact that he'd got 5,000 people with cancer onto workfare program.
Yeah, I mean it sort of defies belief, doesn't it? But you can see their.
Can you imagine if someone told you got cancer and then you for whatever reason you've had to like stop working and that, and now they've told you got to go work in pound stretcher.
Well, one of the things is I sort of can't imagine it, and I think that's partly what they trade on, do you know what I mean? I think that's one of the reasons why you're not allowed to talk about things like fucking cancer and disability and so on, is that if you keep that as this kind of thing that we know is there but without actually fucking identifying it, then you can treat those people how you like, do you know what I mean? And I think that's a big part of why the culture's so silent on things like that.
I mean, they've just walked into privatisation, the outsourcing of the NHS. We got £5 billion contract this week up for Richard Branson wants it, Circle. I mean, that was unthinkable.
Yeah. But also people's passivity in the face of it is quite unthinkable.
Yeah.
You would have thought if you'd said a while ago that they were going to break up the NHS, that there would be fucking riots.
Yeah, I mean, where are the unions?
Yeah, I think that you've got to remember the unions are at the end of a 30-year campaign against them that probably started with the Labour government before Thatcher.
Yeah, but I mean, in lots of ways that some of the agenda, like the attack on the nurses, which is completely related to the unions. Do you know what I mean? And also to the BBC, the way that. They've lost a body, they've got to go on a safari, they're incompetent. There was one thing about this nurse was off to Alton Towers when she was off sick. It was in the fucking Daily Mail. Yeah. It's like fucking crazy.
Well, I mean, if you just look at that dispassionately, there are things where they try to demonise and marginalise people like nurses and firefighters and ask yourself, well, do you agree with that? That's a good question. If you're looking at the fucking tabloids or you're looking at the TV news, you go, well, do I agree with that, or do I value firefighters? I quite value people who are prepared to risk their lives for. Other
but they've attacked teachers as well, and it buys into like all sorts of, and it's about work. What we was talking about work, and people saying, oh, they get fucking holiday, they get 6 weeks a year. They've got no fucking idea what it's like to work in a comprehensive secondary school or any other fucking school. Right, Hillsborough, justice, no legal aid. They've taken away legal aid.
What, is this a new thing?
Yeah, there's no more legal aid. Well, basically, they've employment. Yeah, Chris Grayling, no legal aid for nothing.
Well, we were talking last night about that, weren't we? Like the whole thing of there's been such a long cover-up for Hillsborough, and that you don't really. It took so long for that to be dealt with anywhere in the culture. So like eventually, like a Jimmy McGovern play came along, and you're like, well, where is that? That's quite a major thing for a society, particularly a society that's obsessed with football, and where that's a big identifiable part of people's lives, that something like that happens, is subject to a fucking brutal cover-up, and then the whole fucking culture lies silent about it for over 20 years. I mean, that seems incredible. I
was speaking with Janet Alder, and her brother was killed, and no justice, and you look at John Charles Jimenez, and I think what happened with John Charles Jimenez, it was like they got found perjury, 7 policemen in a coroner's court. But nothing, the CPS or no one took them to task about that. It's almost like they have immunity.
Yeah.
I mean, going back to like the government, Nick Clegg, just quickly, just let's briefly skim on Nick Clegg. He said like he wanted to do something about the racist fans, and someone was saying if only he was somebody like the Deputy Prime Minister, he could actually do something about it. He's an apologist.
I was thinking that in the last party conference, that essentially they were saying what they would do if only they weren't in power. It was like a fucking, it was like a satire, and.
He's the one who fucked the students. He completely fucked the students.
Like,
you know, where have they gone? Where's that protest? Because we just said that. Where's that? Where is the protest?
But I mean, you've got to accept now that you have a political class who don't have any concern for people, so he doesn't really give a fuck about students or anybody else.
Ed Miliband doesn't give a fuck.
Getting a ministerial
Ed Miliband?
Ed Miliband, in a society, if we were like a primal society or something, I mean, Ed Miliband wouldn't be put in charge of fucking gathering kindling, do you know what I mean? He looks like someone with a fucking
Boris Johnson,
hysterical personality disorder. Boris Johnson is just that, he's a part of that thing. I had an interesting thing one time, right, which was like, it was in Romania, and this dude that was our guide, right, he takes us to his flat, and we sit and we watch this Romanian TV show that's like, the guy comes on, does a kind of topical monologue, but he'll do a joke about the Minister of Defence, right? And the Minister of Defence is in the audience in his fucking military uniform, and he'll go up to him and he'll sort of go, that's right, isn't it? And they'll have a bit of back and forth. It's like this total propaganda thing, right? And I was watching it, I was going, this guy, this is fucking terrible. I can't believe they get away with this. And the guy went, no, you have this in your country. I've seen it when I was over. It's called Have I Got News For You? Yeah? And you're like, yeah, that's what it is, you know what I mean? So Boris Johnson comes on fucking Have I Got News. It's all presented as this bumbling thing, do you know what I mean? I was on there once and they're like, next week it's Boris. And I was like, you know. And you're like, well, this is the opposite of what satire is supposed to achieve. Yeah. You're supposed to fucking winnow out people like
it's Terence McKenna, we're led by the least amongst us.
Yeah, totally.
I'm the Arch Taxi Driver, this is Frankie Boyle. Be back with you, part 3, 1 minute.